Hey guys, and welcome back to another React. Today we have a video from the space coder called Pyro is dangerous and you probably shouldn't go there. Kind of resurrecting an old video here, but I think the Pyro topic's interesting and a bit controversial. So the reason that is because, kind of like the intriguing title says, you probably shouldn't go there. And the reason that is because I think a lot of the community's got a false impression of what's going to be in there. It is, as Todd Pappy describes, and apparently no longer with the company, but described it as a null-sec system, which means no security, no law, criminal activity like piracy, etc., gang stuff, PvP will all thrive in Pyro. Whereas Terra is described as the safety system, so it'll be high security, heavily involved with UEE, a lot of gameplay mechanics to protect the player base. That protection's completely absent in Pyro. But because it's the first system and a lot of the community is really driven to exploration, I don't think they understand the associated risks with going there. So it should be an interesting video. I'm really looking forward to where he goes with this. Let's see what Space Coder thinks.
Hello citizens and welcome back. In today's video I want to talk about the recent Pyro playtest, how it went and what issues with the game it showed us. As always, if you like this video, sacrifice a like and a comment to the YouTube algorithm and subscribe for more. And here's
just quickly, like the stations look so good in Pyro. I love that it's polarizing and opposite the Stanton, real rugged, falling apart. I like the aesthetic. Also, the fact that there's heavy emphasis on the gas clouds, dope.
a shout out to our amazing patrons for their support of the channel and the armory. First of all, let's talk about what is Pyro. Pyro is a system that neighbors Stanton. It used to be a lucrative mining system, but now most of the materials present were exhausted. This, combined with an unstable star that regularly unleashes solar flares onto the whole system,
Make sure if you're not familiar with what he's talking about to just search into YouTube after you finish watching Pyro solar flares. It's a mechanic where after a certain time period, a solar flare goes off and your brightness cranks up to like 500% and it basically blinds you. I actually wonder about the legalities of that, but it's a really interesting mechanic. I've never seen that in another video game. It's essentially a longer duration flashbang. But I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what type of impacts the solar flare has on gameplay. Sure.
Mining effort was abandoned. This left a void which was swiftly filled by gangs and various organizations that operate outside of UEE laws. And that statement should immediately highlight how incredibly dangerous Pyro is.
Yeah, it's important to know, like, the Pyro had all this infrastructure, right? And now it's just occupied by gangs. So there were stations, there were these outposts, and they've all been essentially abandoned, and so has the rule of law in there.
This also brings further issues, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. But despite the constant solar flares and dangerous gangs roaming around, there are many settlements across Pyro offering missions, trading opportunities, and possible combat. Now, just because there's no UEE to enforce the laws that we know from Stanton doesn't mean that there aren't any laws at all. The various gangs and factions in Pyro have some interest in keeping order and preventing too much violence and crime, since they depend on the population of the system to produce goods or provide services.
Yeah, I think he's referring to the reputation system here. So the idea is that there's multiple gangs in Pyro all fighting for their share. And owning separate stations. So you decide to mess with one station, that's going to hinder your reputation there, and possibly lock you out of landing, you know, make you an enemy of that faction or clan, and so on. So,
however, that doesn't mean that most NPCs or players you meet in Pyro won't shoot first and ask questions later. And while technically PvP combat is supposed to be a normal occurrence in Pyro,
it's not. It's supposed to be a very common occurrence in Pyro. I mean, Pyro is absent of law, absent of UEE security. So yeah, Like, and it's a null security system. Like, this is where the base building mechanics are going to be in place, where attacking bases, where, you know, the lore is just completely absent. This is the Wild Wild West as described by Todd Pappy at CitizenCon. So, yeah, Pyro is going to be rugged.
Pyro, it did highlight some major issues with the game as a whole. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I am not anti-PvP.
Oh no, here we go. Here we go.
Star Citizen is a PvP game and always will be, but there are some aspects of the game at the moment that tend to make PvP one-sided and sometimes detrimental to the game at large. We saw many instances of players or groups of players locking down certain locations, killing all the NPCs and all the players trying to get there to do stuff.
Yeah, this is like the Brio's outpost at Daymar. The PvP players need to find other fish in the ocean to survive and be able to play, so they have to choke off hotspots. Used to be player stations, but the lag, the security, the annoyances, it's not nearly as common as it used to be. So now it's moved to trade routes and places of interest. But this is totally legitimate gameplay. Need to navigate around that or through it.
Now, this inherently is not bad. It's actually even expected during certain events and at certain locations like Jumpdown. And generally, if you arrive at the location of your mission and you see a bunch of hostile ships and you don't want to fight them, you have the option to leave and come back later. This is currently somewhat limited by persistence though. Let's say you have a delivery mission that takes you to an outpost. You arrive and discover that a group of players is shooting at anyone who tries to land. It's reasonable to assume that they will be there until someone removes them by force, and even then there is no guarantee they won't come back. You are now left with the option to fight and likely lose or abandon your mission. Once missions persist through sessions, this won't be as much of a problem.
Yeah, but is this really a problem? Like, okay, you've bit off something more that you could chew by going to an outpost, you take the loss. You don't have to deliver the box, you don't have to complete that mission in particular. It's a very casual gameplay loop, delivering boxes. There's not a lot of reward, there's not a lot of risk, so you just take the loss right there. It's all good, it's not a big deal.
However, during the Pyro playtest, we saw players preventing other players from leaving the spawn locations or locking down outposts for no reason other than to kill people. Such players are commonly labeled as murder hobos or griefers.
Yeah, so what they're referring to there is the fact that you could do FPS gameplay in the stations, to which I'm kind of impartial towards. Like, it's really surprising that they're allowing that, but they're also creating, like, boundaries to getting inside stations if you don't have the reputation, etc., etc. So if you go into a certain gang's station, you start shooting up everyone inside, you're going to lose reputation very quickly, and they're going to deny you landing in the future. If you camp the space around the station, likely the same scenario, I would imagine, but not nearly as big an issue. I love the idea of FPS in stations, to be honest, because there's so little converging points for FPS gameplay to even happen, and this is Pyro. But with that being said, we don't want players camping the beds or the hospital respawn points, right? So, yeah, mixed feelings about this. Maybe they can restrict sections of the stations for weapons and then have other sections totally fine with it. But as far as camping outside of these stations in Pyro, I'm all for it. They're hotspots. This isn't UEE controlled system anymore, and there's no turrets to defend players, etc. But once you're leaving the hangar of a station, you know, your shields are up, your engines are on. You got to get out of that yourself, I think.
And while what they do is annoying, it doesn't meet CIG's definition of griefing. This is mostly because there are and there will be mechanisms to prevent murder hobo behavior. So let's take a look at what those are. Currently, the official stance of CIG is that they prefer a PvP solution to anything else. This means that they want
base take
players to group together and defeat the bad actors. And while I have seen it happen, it rarely works and generally it is not cost effective to the group trying to clear the location.
And this is where the economy comes into play. Like, if you asked me where I would want to work and what department at CIG, if I ever did, it would, without a doubt, hands down be the economy team. I think the economy needs the most attention, as you guys are probably familiar with my other videos, but the issue here is the economy. Why would players want to go after player bounties when they're hardly reward the effort, hardly worth the effort? The problem is they need to buff playing lawful PvP, and then, like CIG mentioned, PvP solutions can solve PvP problems. The problem is that there's no reason to play lawful PvP because you're just getting less PvP for doing so. So if they buff the rewards for doing that, made it more enticing, I think you'd find that the PvP community will clean up after the PvP community. Also important to note too that PvP community tends to be far more experienced with flight and flying spaceships than the average do-gooder that is bounty hunting for that week. So an issue is with the flight systems too, or the flight model. So master modes will restore balance to that, strengthen numbers. The PvPers don't have numbers when they go into a server. I think the problem's going to solve itself at 323, to be honest. The lowering of the skill ceiling, master modes, hopefully some economy changes could fix all of this easily. Easily. I would play lawful PvP if it was worthwhile, but for me, it's just less waves to surf, really. It's less content.
Now, why is that? Well, generally it's pretty rare for random players to form a group to fight other players, at least in my experience. You could bring in your org, but why waste org resources fighting people holding an outpost that has no strategic value other than that you want to deliver a box? Also, in the case of camping spawn locations, you might not even be able to take off to meet the attackers in combat. The other problem is that for a successful assault, you need to have more people on your side or more skill, which...
Yeah, not anymore. Master modes, if you have a small player advantage, then you're in big trouble. So I think the act of locking down stations, outposts and stuff is going to be far more difficult and far more contested when it comes to like the lawful side versus the criminal side. I think PvP is really about to be revolutionized, and I don't think these problems are going to exist for much longer than a couple months, actually.
Generally also doesn't happen, but arguably that's a skill issue. Also, technically by trying to fight, you are enabling the murder hobo behavior, and generally you will lose a lot of time and resources with minimal gain, with the notable exception of jump down and similar events.
I just don't like this murder hobo terminology. Like, I'm really not a fan of it. Of course, nor am I a fan of everyone calling anyone that PvP is a griefer, but this is a full loot weapons on PvP game. Yeah, like the theme park includes PvE, missions, bounties, all that jazz, but weapons are enabled in 99% of the verse. So someone's player like murder hobo for me is just trying to gain progression. Like if I shoot at this mole in space, chances are he's got cargo, his ship is worth salvaging, and he might have rare loot on his body. Might even have cargo stored to be transferring stuff from A to B. When there's reward placed by CIG given the looting mechanics to killing players, it doesn't make them a murder hobo, it makes them playing the game. They're playing the criminal aspect of it, but it's not this horrible thing. I mean, they directly get fed from doing so. Back in the day, players weren't worth killing anything economy-wise. Now they are. And CIG keep buffing that. Like down to the point where the medals on your ship are worth something to someone. So, yeah, I think that terminology is kind of outdated.
But moving on to the technical issues, most locations in the verse are painfully easy to take and hold even in lawful areas in Stanton. You would expect stations serving as gang strongholds in Pyro to have formidable defenses, making it nearly impossible for small...
Like, I know I'm harping on this, but if PvE players are going around doing missions, bunkers for loot, and the best loot is on players in subscriber gear and rare items and looted items themselves, then aren't you just trying to loot better equipment by killing players? Yeah, there's some consequences to it, but that's the whole point of it. So I don't agree with that, sorry.
Group to prevent anyone from taking off. In theory, improving the defenses of critical locations actually helps the PvP solution, because it tilts the advantage towards the defenders or people trying to clear the location. The second major problem is consequences. Currently, there are no consequences to murder hobo behavior in lawless systems and very little consequences in lawful systems. You do gain a crime stat, which will prevent you from accessing certain locations, but generally doesn't hinder you from doing most things in the game. And it doesn't discourage the behavior, and it can be easily removed. It does mean that bounty hunters might come after you, but that's just more fuel to the murder hobo fire. So what's the solution?
It's more PvP for the PvPers. I don't think it's like this huge problem.
It would be the long-term reputation system. In lawful systems, this would essentially place a permanent crime stat on people breaking the law repeatedly. It gets a bit more complicated in lawless systems though. Since there is no central authority, you can't place permanent crime stat on a player. But it's safe to assume that if you attack people around facilities controlled by a certain faction, that faction will become increasingly hostile towards you. This would eventually provoke immediate hostile action if you run into that faction. While this won't prevent camping points of interest, combined with powerful defenses, it might make camping spawn points a lot more difficult. I also heard an
which is fine, like, camping spawn points isn't great gameplay, for sure, so fine with that.
Interesting idea that the reputation of an individual would also affect the reputation of their organizations. Which sounds interesting, but not sure quite how that would work. Especially for large orgs, this would mean that all the members would have good reputation with many factions without ever interacting with them. So, will reputation fix the murder hobo problem? Probably not, but eventually once logistics become more important in Star Citizen, they will have a much harder time to exist.
The only thing that's going to balance or solve, quote, the murder hobo problem is master modes. Like, this video should have been about master modes if we're talking about that, because in master modes the skill ceiling is just plummeted down to the point where slight number advantages are going to pay off tenfold and are often can't be overcome. So the answer really is master modes. It's the flight model changes.
What does that mean? Well, imagine that you are a would-be murder hobo that just started the game with a neutral reputation. You can go pretty much anywhere you like, and you will likely be provided services like fuel, repair, and access to stations and landing zones. Let's say you pick a system in the UEE to start, for example Terra. You kill a few NPCs and players
and Terra's a high security system.
And eventually get caught and sent to prison. Upon release, your reputation has worsened. You are now supposed to be a reformed criminal, so some mission givers might be reluctant to communicate with you until you repair your reputation. On the other hand, other unlawful mission givers might start getting interested. Of course, it might take a few more prison sentences to achieve this depending on how CAG balance it. But you go and again kill a few players and NPCs in this lawful system. Maybe this time it takes longer to get caught, so you manage to rack up quite a few charges before you're caught. This time you are a repeat offender, so your sentence is much longer, but maybe you mine your way out or even escape this time. But now your reputation has taken quite a hit, so very few mission givers in a lawful system will want to interact with you, and some areas might even refuse you entry. This cuts off your access to supplies and your income. Now, why would you care about supplies or income? You still need fuel, repairs, food, and medical attention, and you need to pay for it somehow.
Yeah, like it's an interesting debate when it comes to like high security systems. Should criminal PvP be even possible there? It's an interesting debate. To be honest, we're getting so much with these medium security and null security systems that I'm kind of just hands off with it. Like, let these players that keep complaining about PvP and murder hobos, let them live in terror in peace. Let them play the game they paid for, despite it not being in the game description. But let them have their safe space that they can frolic in, and that way we can absolutely justify the bloodbaths that are happening in the null security systems, which is the opposite in design, right? But it's when like these type of mechanics start encroaching upon the other type of security systems that I have an issue. But high security systems, especially Terra, give it to them. If you do criminal behavior in there, in my opinion, don't even allow access through the gate into Terra. Like, kick them out. It's fine. Doesn't bother me none. Because you got to realize too, is Todd Pappy described these systems as low profit. So where there is low risk, there is low profit. Medium risk, medium profit. Pyro, high risk, high profit. So let them have their safety.
So eventually this forces you to go to a slightly less lawful system like Stanton. You again have access to a source of income, and there are locations that will let you access their services despite your reputation. But you once again kill some players and NPCs, and maybe this time you don't get caught, because you can just hide at Grimhex indefinitely and avoid bounty hunters. But of course you continue killing players and NPCs, and eventually you aren't welcome even at Grimhex. So you move over to Pyro, where the local gangs probably won't mind your presence. But as you go around killing people and disrupting their operations, even they will eventually try to get rid of you or refuse to provide services. Eventually, this will mean that you have to leave lawless systems too. Where does this leave you? Either you can go to a Vanduul occupied system and hope for the best, or you can go to a system that's not settled and thus has no one to maintain reputation with.
Okay, now this is getting a little ridiculous. You're entitled to that in a high security system, but I don't think anyone in medium risk, medium security systems, or a low, you can call it low security system if you like, but systems like Stanton are getting evicted because their reputations are poor. Like, there's criminal elements in Stanton, which you're going to be able to reside in, so no, I think, and especially if you're trying to like push this agenda onto Pyro, then you've completely lost me. Should be a 50-50 split on the low security slash medium. The high security goes all the way to the safer experience and brutal reputation consequences. And then Pyro, total freedom. But no, I wouldn't want, players being forced to settle in Vandal systems because they PvP. Nope.
Either way, getting food, fuel, or regeneration will be extremely difficult. This, however, does bring some questions. For example, how is insurance going to work for people outside the law? I can't imagine an insurance company replacing a ship for someone who is a wanted criminal, or a shipyard delivering to a lawless system. How is this going to affect LTI? I am very curious to see how CAG deals with this, as it's a pretty relevant issue with the game. I suppose that lawless systems could have some kind of a ship broker that supplies players with ships that were stolen. Though again, I am not sure how that works with insurance. And with that being said, that's all for today. What do you think? How should the game deal with murder hobos? Is the PvP solution a good one? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, fly safe, and I will see you in the verse.
Yeah, not a bad video, but it kind of lost me when it became about murder hobos. It should have mentioned PvP in the title, to be honest, because it kind of took over at that point. But no, I think Master Modes is going to really hinder the PvP community playing the way they know it. I think that organizations and non-interested in PvP players are going to be able to stand up for themselves quite easily, and outnumber players playing in bad or criminal faith, right? So, no, I think the game's going to solve itself, and the best thing CIG can do is buff the rewards to make it enticing enough to play lawful PvP. And then you've got the PvP murder hobos cleaning up the PvP murder hobos, right? So PvP can solve it too. It's not just the problem. But I also think that players need to set their expectations properly when they start talking about venturing out of systems like Terra. You need to understand the risk. You need to understand what type of game you're playing, because PvP is a huge, constant part of it. People need to realize what kind of systems they're jumping into, what that entails. Anyways, not a bad video. I enjoyed it. I'll throw his video in the description. Let me know what you guys think about all this jazz, specifically Pyro. I'll catch you guys in the next one, yeah? GG's, GG's.